Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Got mics working. Good. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, James. I should also say I was originally going to be presenting alongside another James Todd from Edinburgh, Napier, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. So I'm going to try and represent him as well as I can when we get into the details about the actual project. A little bit of background about Proof ID. We are a specialist identity management consultancy based in Manchester. We've got a very long track record of working in academia, in particular because, as some of you may be aware, we acquired Salford Software last year, and many of you, I'm sure, will have worked with Salford Software on identity management projects over a number of years. Yeah, we've been around this space for quite a long time. In this talk, I think the previous talk was very interesting and talked about the whole, the whole of identity and access management. We're going to really hone in on one area during this talk, which is about single sign-on. So a real-world example of single sign-on, looking at the case study of Edinburgh Napier University, and what really is achievable, and then crucially, how do you actually get there? So, I'm going to start with some general information or general points about single sign-on. What is it and how do you do it, which might seem simple, but a lot of people have different views on this. Then we'll go into the specifics of the case study and what we achieved there and how we did it. And then going to look in a bit more detail at the technology that we used to deliver the solution. And then just to finish up with some general points about how maybe you should be thinking about, if you're looking at this kind of solution, some of the questions we think you should be asking. Okay, what is SSO? So, single sign-on is one of those things. Lots of different people have a different view about what this means. So I've sat in a lot of meetings where it's been clear that we've not been necessarily talking the same language. And if I had £1 for every different definition of single sign-on I'd have come across, I'd probably have about £5. But you know. So I thought it would be useful just to go through some of the different definitions and ideas around single sign-on and what it can mean to sort of set the context for the presentation. So the first one, well, actually before we get into that, single sign-on itself. So single sign-on generally means sign in with one set of credentials and get access to lots of different applications within the same session, typically in a web browser. But simplified sign-on often kind of gets confused with this. So simplified sign-on really means you've got a single set of credentials. So maybe using LDAP authentication, maybe you're provisioning the same set of username and passwords into all your different applications. So users have to physically log into each application, but they've got the same credentials to do so. So that's simplified sign-on, not really single sign-on, but lots of people will use the terms interchangeably. So single sign-on then is kind of building on that. So there's a single set of credentials, but you log in once. So when you either go to a portal or you go to maybe one of your web-based applications, sign in once with a single set of credentials, and after that you get automatically signed into all your different applications. So no more login prompts. So that to me is single sign-on. Seamless single sign-on. So this is taking it one step further, and this is really the idea that once you've signed into your computer in the morning, done your initial login to your workstation, there should be no more login boxes at all. So really that's kind of, typically that means using Kerberos authentication in the background, but the idea is it's really a really great user experience. So no login windows at all. Single sign-on domain. So we find this a lot in universities that they maybe have 3, 4, even more sometimes single sign-on technologies within the same organisation. So for example, you may have Shibboleth to do single sign-on to your UK Access Management Federation applications. You may have ADFS, which is looking after your single sign-on into Office 365 and maybe some of the other Microsoft products. Maybe you've got CAS for your on-premise systems. And what you tend to find is you get single sign-on into these pockets of applications, but you don't necessarily get single sign-on across all of the applications. So you kind of end up in that scenario with maybe single sign-ons, which isn't quite the same thing. So really, the kind of gold standard for this then is really to try and extend that and have a single sign-on experience across all of your applications, regardless whether they're in the cloud, part of the UK Federation, on-premise, whatever they are. So that's unified single sign-on. And Really, in terms of a gold standard, what you can aim for is a seamless, unified SSO. So all your applications are covered within the same single sign-on domain, and after you've authenticated to your workstation in the morning, no more login boxes. So in terms of what can you achieve, that's a reasonable thing to aim for. Okay, so different ways of doing single sign-on, and we've seen lots of different approaches to this in our rounds of the universities. So the first, what I would describe as DIY approach to single sign-on. So that's kind of a homegrown, home-developed solution. Can work really well. Typically, the way we've seen these kind of things develop, normally first to get this to work, you have to sign into a portal, and then there's some kind of bespoke mechanism under the hood to actually to provide the single sign-on. So can work quite well, but it's got all the same problems actually that in fact James was alluding to earlier around having a home-developed system and supporting that for the long term, and actually quite often a lot of the knowledge tends to be within a single person. Also can be quite brittle because of the ways that applications work. It can be quite difficult to make it work end to end. So that's one approach. Another approach that certainly was really widely used and still is in many cases is form fill. So this is the idea that you can take a set of credentials, maybe you can pull them from a directory service, or maybe you've got some kind of password vaulting, and you can replay them into a login form when the user wants to go to log into that application. So that works quite nicely. That's quite a simple, easy to understand way of doing things. A couple of downsides with it. So one is to make that work, you kind of need to have credentials in the target applications that you're actually trying to authenticate to. So you're having to actually store identity in those applications. You're also having to transmit the password when you do the authentication. The other reason why there's a problem with this is this. So I don't know if you've noticed, but recently Google have changed their login forms so that where you used to have username and password on the login form, you now just get prompted to put in your username. Password's on the next page. Now they've done this for various reasons, but mainly Google believes that the password is pretty much no longer fit for purpose. So what they're doing is by moving the password onto the second page, they're allowing the opportunity to put in other authentication methods in between the username and the password. So you're starting to see things like Google Authenticator or other multi-factor solutions will start popping up as part of the authentication process. And what that says to me is that password or simple username and password as a way of doing authentication, its days are probably numbered, and increasingly we're going to start seeing adoption of other authentication methods. So form fill is going to break at some point as an approach for doing single sign-on. So the other approach, and the way that I would very much recommend, is taking a standards-based approach. So this is really federated single sign-on using standards. And there are a number of well-defined standards in this area that you can use. We touched on some of them earlier. So SAML is the big one. Probably 80–90% of federated authentication is via SAML at the moment. So it's quite widely deployed and well understood. There's the WS Trust and WS Fed, which is Microsoft's kind of slightly modified version of SAML, which is widely used for things like Office 365 and so on, although those are now starting to support SAML as well. And then we've got OAuth, and on top of OAuth, OpenID Connect. So really they do pretty much the same job as SAML, but in a much more lightweight kind of way. And I think OpenID Connect is one that we're going to see an awful lot of traction and adoption of that. It's starting now with some of the big SaaS vendors, but we're going to start to see more and more adoption around that. The key point with all of these are standards, so there's nothing bespoke going on here. So it's a really good way of actually implementing single sign-on in a scalable, supportable kind of way that's not going to be brittle when you do upgrades or have any of the issues that you would have with form fill. So what does federated single sign-on look like? Very quickly. So fundamentally, what we're doing here, this isn't Napier, by the way, this is generic, just to give you the idea. But fundamentally, what we're saying is users can sign in, and they can either hit a portal, or they can go direct to the target applications. So that could be cloud applications outside the firewall, like Office 365, Google, maybe hosted, Blackboard if you have that. Or they could go and hit internal applications that you're running internally. But the key point is in terms of what's actually going on here is you're delegating the authentication from the target application back to the Federation service, whatever that is. So we're setting up a trust relationship between the application and the authentication service, and we're delegating the authentication. So essentially, we're saying, if we want to go to Office 365, Office 365 will say, where are you from? You put in your email address, it'll say, okay, you're from Napier, I trust Napier. If you can authenticate at Napier, then because we've got that trust relationship, I'm going to let you in. So that's great, because we're not transmitting passwords on the wire. We don't need to push credentials out into cloud applications or even internal applications, and it's also based on a standard. So in terms of supportability and upgrades and so on, it's very robust. Now, a great byproduct you get of this is you get single sign-on within a browser session, because it relies on token exchange and cookies and so on, that once you've authenticated to that Federation service, you then have a token essentially that you can use to authenticate to other applications. So you get the single sign-on experience as well as having the security benefits and other benefits associated with the federated approach. So that's federated SSO. What I wanted to do is just kind of put this into a slightly wider context. Because single sign-ons is I said it's a small part, it's a specific part of the overall picture, but really what we're trying to achieve and what this kind of technology enables you to do is deliver on this vision where what we want with modern identity management is basically to allow any user, and that can be students, workforce, partners from other organisations, doesn't really matter, on any device, because that's just the way it is now. We don't have the ability to actually lock down or mandate what kind of devices many of your users are going to use. And increasingly, globally, the concept of inside or outside the firewall, or inside is good, outside is bad, these concepts don't really have the same meaning that they used to. So, we're dealing with a global world, and we need to be able to handle that. So any user, any device, anywhere in the world, access any kind of application. And again, the applications, they could be on-premise, they could be cloud-hosted, it could just be an API that you need to authenticate to. That's the modern world and what we're trying to deliver. So that's what your users want. What you want is to be able to deliver all of that, but to do it securely. And really, in a sense, while we're talking about SSO, really that's the technology that we're talking about here and the kind of vision that you can deliver on. Okay. I'm going to talk a bit more specifically about the work we did with Edinburgh Napier. This is the bit where James would be talking. So just looking at the overall project. So as James mentioned, Edinburgh Napier had a single sign-on technology. It was based on NAM, Novell Access Manager, which is a good technology. But it's complex, and there was a skills issue within the university. It didn't have the adoption that was required. It was mainly being used for a few external applications. At the same time, there was Shibboleth for UK access management solutions, some other bits and pieces to provide single sign-on to internal resources. So really there was not really joined up single sign-on experience. So I think the key challenge for the project was to try and address that and have a single technology that's going to provide this seamless, unified single sign-on experience across all of the university's applications. So the university went out to tender and looked at a number of different solutions. Ultimately, they decided to go with Proof ID and in particular the solution we put forward, which was a hybrid implementation of Ping Federate, so with on-premise components, but also with a cloud element as well, hosted essentially application launchpad, and we'll show you that in a bit more detail as we go through what that means. But very much a hybrid deployment, which I think reflects the reality of most universities having to manage, a combination of on-premise applications and externally hosted or cloud applications. That's where most of us are at. What we've managed to implement is a resilient implementation to deliver the single sign-on experience across the initial tranche of applications, which is going pretty well. So we started off with a proof of concept. We were invited in to actually implement a small proof of concept just to prove that the technology would do the job. And the idea was that this was just a limited subset of what would actually be deployed in production. So what we had here was an instance of Ping Federate on premise. authenticating users against Active Directory, but crucially also doing the Kerberos authentication to get that seamless sign-on experience. And then we were doing federated authentication into Moodle and into SharePoint as well, and then out to the Ping1, which is the launch pad. So it was a subset of the applications. We had to demonstrate that we could support multiple protocols because, you know, the real world is that everything isn't SAML. A typical university, you're going to have applications that support SAML, WS-Fed, WS-Trust, OAuth, and probably a bunch of applications that don't support any of those. So we needed to demonstrate that the solution was going to be able to cover all of those off so that it would be future-proofed, essentially. We also implemented a form fill option as your real sort of option of last resort, really. There are going to be some scenarios where you just cannot do a federated authentication, and typically we're going to be talking about SaaS vendors there, so cloud vendors who don't control the application, who haven't implemented a federation standard, and who don't give an alternative means such as an API of actually authenticating. So in those scenarios, there is still currently a place for doing form fill and password vaulting. It enables you to give that sort of unique experience, that consistent experience, but it should be very much viewed as the option of last resort, really. So we proved that could be done as well. So after we successfully got through the POC, the next step was actually to start designing out the final solution and the final architecture. So this is at a high level, this is what we're actually implementing. So on-premise, we've got a resilient Ping Federate instance, which is doing all of the single sign-on and federation. Again, authenticating against AD and doing the seamless sign-on via Kerberos. For external users who aren't signing into the domain and therefore don't have a Kerberos ticket, we can do HTML form authentication. So we can detect where a user is and have different authentication policies as a result of that. We've then got federation into a number of on-premise applications using a number of different standards. So we've got SAML and WS-Fed are the main two that we're using there. The server is going to participate in the UK Access Management Federation as an IDP, and we're importing the metadata from the UK Federation to enable that to take place. And then there's a number of cloud applications as well that need to be integrated into the system. So WebEx, Office 365, and Replicon. And again, they all have different ways of doing the federation between SAML and WS-Fed. So that's what we're looking to implement, and that would, give that unified single sign-on experience. So unified single sign-on, seamless single sign-on, and again, standards-based. So in this instance, actually, there is no need for form fill, but it's there as a backup. But this is a fully standards-based approach. Here's a nice word, SAMLization. So I made that up, I think. The point is there's a number of applications here that don't support a federation standard. And if you're going to do a standards-based approach, you need to have a way of actually integrating with those applications so that they can actually do something with a SAML token. So examples of that were Papercut, where we've had to implement part of the integration kits that come with the Ping Federate product to enable us to actually bring federation to that product, even though it doesn't natively support it. So that's I think in universities where there's such heterogeneous environments, we've got every different kind of application and technology, you don't always have complete control over which applications are implemented. That's a really key point to think about, is actually how will you do that integration with the applications that don't support the standards. Okay, so this is the last technical slide, really. This is just to show the architecture and the sort of layout of what we deployed. So there's a resilient stretched cluster of Ping Federate nodes which have been implemented across 2 data centers at the university. So we've got sort of geographical resilience between those instances. So we can lose one site and everything will carry on working. I'm not sure there's anything else to say about that, really. So it's a clustered environment, geographically redundant, Hybrid architecture again, so we've got the launch pad is actually hosted in the cloud, so we've got spreading across both environments. Another key point, of course, is all of the communication here, the way it's been configured, is happening in the browser. So in terms of the communications and the network piece, that makes things really, really easy, and that the applications don't necessarily need to speak directly to the Federation server. We're handling all of that through redirects. Okay, so just a couple of screen grabs of how it actually looks like. So the look and feel of everything's been fully customized to fit in with the university's institutional look and feel. So that's the login form. So you never see this if you're actually domain joined, but if you're external, that's what you see when you actually need to log into the system. And then this is a key win for the university, really, is this idea of the launch pad. So what we've implemented is a launch pad where students can go, and it's going to give them icons for all the systems that they're actually entitled to use. And actually this is going to enable the university to, as I understand it, retire part of the portal that's currently in place and replace that functionality for students, which is a big win for the university. So it's a very convenient way of actually providing quick access to applications. Okay, so the status is we've done about 15 days working with James Todd to actually implement this, and as of the 24th of November, we were in production with the first tranche of applications. So it's Office 365 for email and OneDrive, Papercut, 5 separate instances of Moodle, WebEx and Easy Proxy, and the Ping1 Launchpad is there, although I think that's actually going to be published for students in the run-up to Christmas, is my understanding. And then later phase, we're going to come back to SITS, SharePoint, Replicon, and the UK Access Management Federation, I think, is scheduled to go in January. So yeah, it's in production, running now, and actually has gone really, really well in terms of the go-live experience and how it's performing. You know, one of the key things that's been noticed, actually, the speed of authentication, in particular with Moodle, is really, really good, and it's, you know, giving a really good experience to users. So some lessons learned. So there's always lessons learned. So one thing we found is some of the vendors may not necessarily fully or officially be prepared to support a working configuration. So a good example of this is SITS, in that there is a configuration that we were able to prove and that it works, but they will only support it if you're using Apache for SITS rather than IIS. And the university is currently running IIS, so there's a decision to be made there about actually, well, do we go with something that's going to work but might not be supported, or do we switch to Apache, or do we just defer and have a think about it? And I think at the moment it's in the defer and have a think about it sort of stage. Oh, I've gone backwards, sorry. So that's one thing to be aware of, is that the vendors of the applications might make things difficult. You will need to change the configuration on some of your applications to support federated authentication. And I think you might come across both hard issues and soft issues with this. So the hard issues are that it might be hard to make those changes. There might be changes that your application team, you know, aren't familiar with, or actually it needs to go through change control or so on. So that's just something to be aware of. You are changing the way that applications do authentication. The soft issues are you're asking people to change, you know, people who maybe look after an application, this isn't their project, and you're asking them to make changes. And they may be resistant to that to greater or lesser degrees. Some of the people might be delighted that you're bringing them federated authentication. Other people might actually say, well, you know, that's not on my roadmap. And there may be some soft issues that you need to work through there to get everybody on side. That's kind of a common problem with identity management, because by design, identity management touches all the different applications. It doesn't live on its own and do its thing. Networking configuration can get complicated, in particular with the load balancers. So we had some fun and games getting Papercut to work, where it turned out that the load balancers weren't rewriting, or were rewriting, I forget which way it was, part of the URLs on the way through, which caused things not to work. So we had to do some interesting troubleshooting with Napier's networking team to get to the bottom of that. So yeah, there can be some challenges around there. And the final one, really, when working with cloud applications, it's great when it works. The problem is when it doesn't work, you can't very well walk into Microsoft's data center in Dublin and reboot the server. It doesn't really work like that. So the specific problem we had was we had an hour window in order to switch over to a federated authentication for Office 365. We ran all the scripts to do that. Everything changed on the tenancy, apart from the fundamental setting, which was to change it from a managed to a federated domain. So after 10 minutes, they weren't very worried. After 20 minutes, they were starting to get a bit worried. After 30 minutes, they were starting to think about backup plans. And after 45 minutes, magically, the change just took place. So clearly something was slow to replicate at the back end. Now the problem you've got is you've got no control over that, really. You can do everything right, but if there's a problem within the SaaS application, you're kind of at the mercy of the vendor, really. So just make sure if you're doing that, there is a backup plan and you know what you're going to do if things don't go quite according to plan. Okay, so that's the project. I mean, it's been a really successful project. It's gone really well. I'm aware I've talked a bit about Ping Federate, and there might be some of you in the room saying, what's Ping Federate? So I thought we'd just give a bit of background on what it is and why the university opted to go down that route. So Ping Federate is essentially, it's the market-leading single sign-on and federated authentication platform. I quite often describe it as sort of ADFS and Shibboleth and CAS all in one box with a bunch of additional sort of integration features. The key thing with it is because it's got all of the support across all the different protocols and standards, it does enable you to really deliver on that vision of having a single technology to provide this unified single sign-on across all of your applications without having to have different single sign-on or federation products to do different parts of your authentication. The other key thing about Ping Federate, it's very mature. It's been around for 13 years and is used, I think, by 50 of the Fortune 100 companies. So it's got a very big presence in sort of blue chip enterprise. And as a result of that, there's an awful lot of integration know-how within the organization, and that's kind of surfaced in the integration kits that you get as part of the product. So this is really thinking back to what I was saying earlier about you're going to have applications that do not support federation. So how are you going to federate with them? And that's really where Ping Federate comes into its own with, I think there's 80 pre-packaged kits, there's a .NET kit, a PHP kit, a Java kit, IIS kit and Apache kit. So there's usually a way of actually enabling an application that doesn't speak a federation protocol to be federated with. And that's really a key thing with the Ping products. So in terms of protocol support, it's all the relevant protocols really. So WS Fed and Trust, SAML, OAuth and OpenID Connect, Kerberos, and then actually an interesting one as well is SCIM. So we've talked a bit about provisioning today. SCIM is, I've changed its name. It's either the System for Cross-Domain Identity Management or Simple Cloud Identity Management. They've changed it, and I forget which direction they've changed it. But the point is, it's the emerging standard that's being adopted for provisioning. So the provisioning tends to be very bespoke. You've got all the different vendors that do provisioning in their own bespoke way. SCIM is an attempt to actually standardize all of that. And we're starting to see some adoption for that, particularly from SaaS vendors. So people like Salesforce and so on are starting to actually now adopt SCIM as the way of actually provisioning into those applications. So it's one to watch. In terms of Office 365 compatibility, 100% certified support for Office 365. So that's Ping Federate. Until a year ago, probably not very widely known in the sector. And as I said, it's very much, Ping Federate's come from the enterprise market. But there's now a number of universities over the past year that we've helped go into production with this technology, and there's a number more that we're working on at the moment. And really what I think we're finding is it's a good fit for dealing with that problem of universities being so complex and having such heterogeneous environments and really answering that integration question. And just analyst view. So really, again, this is just to make the point that the different analysts across the community all see ping and the ping stack of products being the leader or in the leader's space across all the different parts of identity management. So again, whilst it's kind of new to the sector, it's a very mature product. Okay, I feel like I'm rattling through this. How long have I got?
10 minutes.
About 10 minutes, okay. Right, well, I'm near the end, actually, so there we go. We're going to have plenty of time for questions. So I just wanted to wrap up, really, by talking about or thinking about what questions you should maybe be asking if you're going to be selecting a single sign-on technology to try and deliver the same experience that Napier has done. So key questions to think about. So which standards and protocols are going to be supported by the technologies you're looking at? Because I firmly believe, if you think back to the slide around delivering, you know, any user, any place, any device to any application, the key to making that work, the fundamental is standards. Because all the different applications are going to support different standards. And if you go with a product that's very strong in one area, you might be closing the door and actually integrating with other things that come along. So standards is absolutely fundamental. Another question is, you know, to what extent are the standards implemented? So if it supports OAuth, does it support all the different grant types and flows within that standard? Some do, some don't. But actually it's important because a use case will come along where you're going to need some of that. So you're looking not just for breadth of standards, but actually depth, making sure that standards are fully supported. Support SCIM, but does it fully support SCIM? And it's definitely worth delving into that a little bit. And then this is the integration point again. So in the real world, you will have these applications that you need to integrate with that, you know, don't speak SAML. So you need to answer that question. Ask your vendor, how are you going to actually provide federated authentication into this application, whether it's paper cut or something you've developed yourself or something else? How's that going to work? What you probably want to avoid is a situation where you've got one federation platform, but then you need open source modules or different modules sat in front of your applications to actually provide that last mile integration. Because arguably, you're not moving forwards then in terms of having one technology to deliver the solution. So integration is absolutely key. Is there a software development kit? What can you do in terms of actually building custom elements to actually make the solution fit your business needs? Because, you know, all universities are the same, all universities are different. Both those statements are true. We all know that, and there's always going to be special requirements or special things that you need to do. Maybe that's to integrate with an API, maybe that's to go and pull some attributes from a different data store. If you're certainly looking at sort of attribute release as a way of doing authorization. You know, there's most projects we do, there's a need to do something custom somewhere along the way. And if it's not there now, it probably will be in the future. So is that possible? Can you extend the solution? Can you work with it within a supported framework? And taking that all into consideration, you know, will you be able to actually consolidate to a single sign-on platform? You know, is the technology you're looking at going to enable you to actually achieve that vision? And, you know, think hard about that, because you could end up doing a big project to actually implement a new technology and it end up not moving very far forwards, which, you know, is possible. So it's really, if you can answer the questions above, then the answer to that one is probably yes. But that's really the fundamental question trying to answer. And then other universities have been there and done it. So, you know, case studies like this are good because, you know, Napier have been and done it, and they've got the war stories, and they know what worked and what didn't work and what the challenges were. So, you know, share knowledge and find out what worked and what didn't work. Fundamentally, the question is, does your chosen technology have the tools to get the job done, given how complex we know the job can be within this HE sector? So that's it. I'm done. Questions?
Hello. Just because you mentioned paper cut several times, I thought I ought to mention we've got it working with Shibboleth at Oxford. So
Yes, yeah, it will work with Shibboleth, absolutely.
And actually,
it will. If you put the Shibboleth SP in front of it, you can.
it supports sort of the remote user type variable.
Yeah, but it doesn't natively support SAML, so you have to do the remote user. Right. So you need a way of doing that. So if you were going with a commercial vendor, you would find that you would need to put an open source piece of technology potentially in front of Papercut to make that work. Yeah. It's not necessarily wrong. It's just being aware of the fact that you could have multiple technologies required in order to provide that experience.
But I mean, the reason it does that is because we spoke to them and said, this is how we do stuff, change your application, and so they changed it. Now, I'm a bit worried if you start doing kind of your form autofill things and you sort of remove that insistence that it has to be done through SAML or through some sort of federated authentication. Are you actually going to slow the adoption of those sorts of technologies?
I would very strongly recommend you don't do form fill.
No, but I mean, my kind of experience is if you say, you know, oh, and there's a backup option of doing form fill, everyone will go, well, that sounds easy, let's do that. And you lose that, because I mean, we've got quite a long way by kind of digging our heels in and saying, no, you will do SAML, no, you really will do SAML, or you're not.
I fully support what you're saying, absolutely.
I'm just worried you weaken that fact of getting everyone on the programme and getting.
I completely agree with you. I don't support form fill as a way of doing things. I don't think it's a good way of doing things. So I think you should all be requiring your, when you do procurement, to insist on a federation within products that you're buying, because that's going to drive adoption. In the real world, you may have some applications that someone has procured within the university that you need to integrate with. Yeah. And it's worth bearing in mind that that is a situation that you might need to deal with.
I think the trouble is when projects are running late and going over budget, the thing that tends to get kicked out is the proper integration with sort of single sign-on, or just not thought about in the first place. So, yeah, I
couldn't support you more. I completely, fundamentally agree with you. I think it's worth bringing out the form fill thing. You know, as I said in my piece, form fill is going to stop working at some point because of the way the industry is moving away from passwords and towards other means of authentication. It is not a good way of working. From that perspective, it's not a good way of working in terms of actually proliferation of credentials into applications.
Yeah, but I mean, I've certainly been to sort of some of our internal service suppliers and said, you know, they've said we want LDAP binds, and I say, well, we don't do LDAP binds, and they say, well, I've got 100 Java applications, and LDAP binds is all they'll do. So it is useful to have some kind of fallback, I guess.
Well, I think the fallback really, you know, I wouldn't get hung up on the form fill thing. It is really there as a very last resort. The message I would try and get across with what we've done with Napier and the way that we've been able to address that is actually within this technology stack, you've got the integration kits that are there to actually part of the technology to do the job that the Shibboleth SP is doing for you for Papercut. So there's all the different ways of integrating and actually not having to rely on form fill because you've got the way of doing it with integration kits.
Thanks.
Good question.
Thanks, Jonathan, for your presentation. My name is Gregory from the Institute of Cancer Research UK. I was just wondering if you could give an estimation of the cost for implementing a full federated single sign-on.
I can, but it's kind of how long's a piece of string. I mean, if you want to come and see us afterwards, we can talk about that. You know, in terms of consultancy to do this, this is quite quick and rapid to deploy. So, you know, we've done what's seen so far in the initial tranche in about 15 days of consultancy. So we're not in the sort of, you know, the months and months of work to get this done. It's not like provisioning, which is automation and process and governance and so on. This is really, you know, setting up point-to-point communications between systems. How much it's going to cost you in terms of licensing obviously depends on the vendor and the technology you're going to go with. And, you know, we can talk to you about that. I mean, there's academic pricing models and everything available, but of course, you know, it's a commercial question which depends on your circumstances. Sorry.
Hello, I'm David Boakes from Queen Mary University of London. About 10 years ago, we were talking about single sign-on, and the next big thing coming along was context management. And context management is where you could be looking at an individual's records on one system, and in the background it would then automatically pull up the details of the individual on other systems. And I just want to know if that concept is part of the packages that you're talking about.
It's not. Certainly, that was something that we came across, particularly when dealing with the NHS a number of years ago, but it's not part of this suite of products. No.
Okay, thank you.
Hi there. Just one question. What is your opinion of cloud-based authentication systems as opposed to, like, ping seems to be very much box-based, locally based?
As in,
So rather than go to a box, you go out to cloud?
yeah, I mean, well, one of the things about ping is you can have it fully on-premise, fully cloud, or hybrid. So the way I think about that, ping started off life, 13 years ago, before the cloud, or before we called it the cloud, existed, and it was very much an on-premise technology that was dealing with enterprise use cases. Now, ping has moved from on-premise out to the cloud, so they have a cloud version of all of this called Ping 1. So you can do all of this from the cloud if you so wish. I say all of it, probably about 80% of it, because there's just some things you simply can't do from a cloud platform. If you need to do complex multi-factor authentication, if you need to be doing complex sort of different authentication rules, quite often you're going to need something on premise. Now, the differentiator between ping and some of the new entrants, people like Okta or OneLogin, they've started off with a cloud platform and they're now realizing that actually to move beyond the sort of small company kind of use case, to really address the sort of scenarios you're going to be coming across, you need to be able to live in a hybrid world and have both elements. Now, a use case we're deploying more and more frequently now is actually stretching the deployments. You've got part of it on premise and part of it externally, and that means that if you lose your internet connection, for example, rather than losing everything, if you're external, you can still get access to the external things, doing external authentication, and if you're internal, you can still get access to the internal things, doing internal authentication. And we're deploying that with customers right now. My view on the world is, over the next 5 years, I think everybody's going to be in a hybrid world. Some people will be more cloudy, other people will be less cloudy. I don't think that we're going to be fully cloud in that time frame. I think hybrid is going to be the key to actually addressing the reality of what you need to deal with.
I mean, I would probably add to that as well that we did it on premise just because we were a bit scared about putting all of it out. So we put the boxes on to have a bit of control on that as well. So the only other thing I would say it's not so much on what Proof ID did as well as all the companies that we went out to tender for said they could do everything, and we can do that, no problem. And some of them turned up with 20 people almost, and we can do that. And actually the best thing that we had was getting the proof of concept. We give you 4 days, come in, do a couple of bits, prove to us that you can do this. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you need to make sure that it works some way. It's a bit like an interview, and I would say give people a test and let them do it and that stuff as well. And you guys did that for us on that side as well. So yeah. Okay,
Good. All right.
could you all thank Tom? That'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
We'll just stop.